Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm your host, Raja Iqbal. My guest today is Bob van Luijt. Bob is the founder of Weaviate, which I consider one of the foremost databases in industry. It is one of the foremost vector databases, in fact. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Well, thanks so much for having me and your kind words in the introduction.
So let's get started with your early life, Bob. Tell us a bit about yourself, your first introduction to computers, high school. What did you do? Were you doing any programming earlier in your life? Really, how did it all get started?
Yeah, so when I was I think around 10 or 9, I'm born in 85, so that gives you a little bit of context and it's relevant in the story. My dad brought home an IBM XT, right? So like a green and black screen computer. And that computer came with QBasic. QBasic was a huge eye-opener for me. I'm born and raised in the Netherlands, and where I grew up, there was like a library, and you had these books with like programming for kids. And there was a book, QBasic for kids, or basic, something like that. I don't know exactly, but something like that. And I still remember that the first assignment was that you just had an input assignment. It was just like inputs, and then what's your name, and then $ name, and then on the next line it said like echo hi, and then $ name. And I remember that I tried that out, and that I was like mesmerized immediately. That was like, holy cow, this is amazing. I mean, I had to go a long way from there, but that was like my first introduction. And then when I was 15, a little bit before I was 15, so around like 12, 13, we got an internet connection at home. And I was like kind of able to connect two and two together. So I was starting to build websites, just static websites. There was a big Dragon Ball Z website that I made. So it was like that kind of stuff. But the stuff you build at that age. And simultaneously at that time, I fell in love with music and with specifically jazz, which is, at that age, I now know that age that's maybe a little bit unconventional, but for me that came very natural. And I started to play an instrument, and I was like kind of okay at playing that. So when it was time for me to study, so now fast forward a couple of years, I decided to go to the conservatory to study music. But in the meantime, when I was studying at the conservatory, I started my first software business. So I was basically writing software and making money off websites, because everybody was asking like, who can make me a website? So by the end of and I finished my conservatory, so I have a music degree, or a degree in music. So but when I was done, I was like I was making a lot of e-commerce related stuff. So now I was like 19, 20. And then I got a Fulbright grant, a scholarship to go to Boston. And in Boston, I studied at Berklee College of Music. And then I continued writing software. So that was like remote work of all lettres, basically. And then when I was early 20s, I made a lot of, you can still find it online, so a lot of art projects, also some art projects with software. But all that, in the meantime, I was writing software to basically pay for these art projects. But then I noticed how fast and rapid software, especially online, was happening. And, when I was like, 24, 25, I was kind of done. I was like, I'm proud of what I've created, and I want to focus on software. An interest for me started also to slowly rise in business, and like, why do we create stuff of value? And we'll probably talk about that later. And I was hired at my software consultancy business, and I was hired by a publisher. And I very well remember when that was, because it was in 2015, and that was my first introduction to word embeddings. Because out of Stanford, you got GloVe, and I was introduced to that through that publisher, because they, of course, had a lot of unstructured data in the form of published documents, and they were looking for ways to, build new stuff. And while working on it, it was like, the idea started to emerge, like, hey, we can do search with this. And then I was at Google I/O, and a year later, 2016. And back then already, and I fact-checked this, so this is actually, I double-checked that this is actually true. And it is. And so Sundar Pichai said, at Google, we're going to move from mobile first to AI first. And I knew...
And what year was it?
2016.
So 2016,
Google,
okay.
Google I/O 2016. And so people can People can Google that or find that. So it's like that he makes that change from mobile first to AI. And I was like, oh, I think I know what they're doing. They're using vector embeddings in some way, shape, or form. And that was how Weaviate was born. It was not a database yet. It was more like a way to store, embeddings. We calculated centroids based on individual words, stored the centroid, tried to collect them, make data connections and those kind of things. Funny stories, like you can actually find an old video of me on the Google Cloud YouTube channel where I'm interviewed on something called StackChat, where I still refer to Weaviate as a knowledge graph, because the term vector database didn't exist yet. But it was all about these vector embeddings, and talk about vector embeddings showing how we make relations in the data. And then two things happened. So one, of course, the Transformers paper was released, and that had a huge impact on us in the sense that all of a sudden, because of an external factor, the Weaviate just became way better, right? And by then, I also met my co-founder, HN, and we were like, oh, wait a second. This is not just a feature, these vector embeddings. This is going to be the future. So does a database exist that specifically focuses on vector embeddings? No. And then when we started the company, and the company was officially founded in 2019. So we were working already since, I believe, July or June 2019 on vector embeddings. And then, of course, the whole ChatGPT thing happened, right? So, and then in a slipstream of that, all of a sudden, these vector databases came through. But this year, is this correct what I'm saying? No, sorry, next year marks my 10th year, of working with vector embeddings.
Okay, so that's a great overview. So just out of curiosity, right? So you said that you were working in embeddings sort of pre the vector database era, or maybe vector databases were not as mainstream. So what was your storage layer back then? Just out of curiosity, the technical side of me is just curious, right? So what were you doing? You mentioned that you were taking the centroids of, call them text encodings, and not technically not semantic embedding. So how were they stored?
Back then we did that in Elastic with a separate index. And because we always had the assumption, so it was very important for context to have in mind here, there was no business idea yet. This was just a, you know how it goes, right? Open source project, you start working on it, you're excited about it. You're not per se thinking business yet. So we'll probably talk about that later, because it has a huge implication on what Weaviate is today. But back then, it was just a project. And we thought that's probably going to happen in Lucene, right? So that's what's the thing that sits under Elastic or Solr. And what happened was, and here the kudos go to my co-founder, he said, hey, wait a second. Lucene is somewhat suboptimal to do this. So, and it has to do with the way that with the sharding mechanism and how the graph is stored and how it's merged together, blah, 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 etc. But the point was that we were thinking hey, wait a second. We believe that there is room in the market for a database that specifically focuses on vector search. And what is important to bear in mind here as context is that the problem with brute force vector search is that it scales in a linear fashion. So that means that the more you add, the slower it becomes, right? So if you have 10,000 data objects, you're not going to notice it. But if you have million or more, it's problematic. So there, the role of these approximate nearest neighbors started to happen. And there's a website, annbenchmarks.com. And what you see on that website, you see all these different approximate nearest neighbors algorithms. And now the algorithm that was adopted for example, Weaviate was HNSW. And now one of your listeners might wonder, but hey, wait a second. If I go to annbenchmarks.com and I look at what's the fastest ANN algorithm, that's not HNSW. That is correct. But HNSW had some very interesting, important properties. Because if you create a database, you want to have CRUD support, create, read, update, delete. Mm-hmm. Turns out that the faster approximate nearest neighbor algorithms did not support that. So then every time that you wanted to add something to the database, you had to rebuild the vector index from scratch. If you have an e-commerce, I can list many use cases, but if you have use cases that want a database, you need to have an ANN library that supports that. So, or sorry, not library. Let's keep my nomenclature straight. An ANN algorithm. Then you need an algorithm that supports that, and that's built into the core of Weaviate, and that's like what sits at the heart. And then we learned, thanks to the open source nature of Weaviate, that ANN is great and vector search is great, but just vector search is often not enough. And that's where the vector database started to differentiate itself, because it got all these features like hybrid search, filtered search, those kind of things, certain types of aggregation, certain types of integrations where the community was saying, hey, we need this to build our vector search cases. So, and that's why the open source community plays a role, because that's something I don't know how we could have done that without the open source community.
Yeah. And do you think back then when you started, probably you were one of the earliest, if not the first one in open source. How about, because this is a long known problem, like, do you think Yahoo and Bing, long time ago Yahoo, right? So then the Yahoo, Bing and Google, did they have any internal implementations of similar ideas, or
Yeah.
and what did it look like? I mean, what did the landscape look like when Weaviate started and open source and some of the giants that already were in this space?
Yes. So one thing that completely surprised me, because we have an advisor in the company in Weaviate who was working on the early vector search capabilities, leading the team, creating Google Ads. That's a vector search use case, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of assuming that, if they do this at Google, if it's so important, then somebody's going to figure this out and they're going to productize this. But, Google's a big company, right? So it's like by the time, of course, like a lot of smart people, so figuring out that this was something that people in the market wanted was not, they figured it out. But by the time that you can actually have something and position that in the market, that might take years, right? That's one thing. The second thing, I think Yahoo, they open source that, right? So at the risk of now saying something that's from an historical context, not 100% accurate, but that's what nowadays I think is Vespa, right? So that is what that was open source, and that's now a business as well. And they also more call it like I believe they call it a big data serving engine. And I think the first open source project that started to really focus on vector embeddings, I think that was Milvus. Mm-hmm. And and this, we're not talking years apart, right? We're talking sometimes months apart. But the approach there was a similar approach to Lucene and Elastic and Solar. We take Facebook's or Meta's vector search library and wrap that around the database. But there the challenge was that, as earlier described, that these ANN algorithms not always are suited to be a database. That became challenging, right? So our thinking was like, hey, we can build something from scratch that is really like, that's a product, right? So that is something, and there also the idea for the business started to emerge. Like, hey, this is a product. And I really learned that randomly open sourcing stuff and then hoping to sell it, that just doesn't work that well. Mm-hmm. You really need to focus on building it as a product. And related to what I said earlier, that my interest in business was starting to grow, I started to connect a couple of things. And I was like, hey, wait a second, if this is happening from a theoretical market, perspective, then this is how we can align it with Weaviate as a product. So that was like why we went the way, took the path that we took. But this is all, we're talking months apart, right? So it's all, yeah. The point is like a couple of people at different places in the world figured out, hey, wait a second, this vector search thing, that this is going to become a thing, because all these machine learning models, they output vector embeddings. Probably somebody's going to want to do something from more an infrastructural perspective with those.
Yeah. So you mentioned Milvus, and I was going to actually ask you, so we hear about Milvus, we hear about Pinecone, Quadrant, and now I believe other mainstream relational and NoSQL players, they are also getting into this vector database market, right? So how do you differentiate Weaviate from well, any of the mainstream players out there.
Yeah, I think what's important to bear in mind is that the vector embedding itself is just a data type. So storing a vector embedding is something we can already do for ages, because it's just it's just an array of floating points or integers nowadays. But the point is, like, it's just an array of numbers, right? Querying it, so retrieving it, that's a different story. That's where these indices start to play a role, right? That's the uniqueness in these indices. So the fact that we now start to see that almost any database under the sun has support for vector embeddings is, in my opinion, like a great thing that shows that there's a need for it. Somebody sent me a video of Larry Ellison this week, even using the words vector database about the new upcoming release of Oracle. So I think it's safe to assume that if it's in the Oracle database, it's established, right? And I think that's a good thing. Great. So now the question becomes about, now you mentioned also new players, right? So also where is it? So now the question is like, okay, so what's differentiating? And if you look at just that history, there's like an age-old thing, right? So we did an interview with Andy Pavlov from Carnegie Mellon, and of course the famous database professor. And I asked him the question that I said, like, why isn't there just one database, just in general? Why are there so many? And one of the conclusions that we got is like that also has to do a lot with developer experience. And so what is a developer building? What does a developer want? What does a developer need? And that's very different, right? So that is in the interaction with today's database are very different. So for example, in the NoSQL time, when we start to see these JSON, these document databases, right? The Postgres people said, you can store a JSON object in Postgres. But of course, the developer experience was very different. So talking about vector databases, it has a lot to do with the quality of the database, which gives a certain type of performance and those kind of things. But it's kind of the low-hanging fruit, because you just put dollars in that, and then great developers work on that. But it's the developer experience, how you educate people, how your clients work, the features that you have, how you get to these features, that is very differentiating. So one thing we say, for example, at Weaviate, is that we like to use the terminology AI native. Right, so where we're saying like Weaviate is AI native, and that it's different from just vector search, that we support way more things than just vector search to build AI native applications. And so that is the big differentiating factor. So model integrations, hybrid search, filtered search, storage of multiple embeddings on data objects, and so on and so forth. And we're going to have a lot of stuff coming up in the pipeline. So that's the big differentiating factor.
And this is the differentiating factor compared to, your traditional mainstream, relational and NoSQL databases. I know Mongo also introduced vector embedding. I was not aware of the Oracle introducing that. So that's must be a moment of pride for you, right? So, hey, finally, right? So they acknowledge that, vector embeddings matter, right? So
this is also what I always tell my team, right? I said, okay, we have two options. Or nobody adopts it. So yes, then you're alone, or like with a very tiny group of companies doing something. But if it's not adopted, then, developers don't want it, right? Yeah. On the other hand, if developers really want it, a lot of people will adopt it. So then you differentiate over the thing that makes you unique. And that starts at the heart with the vector embedding. But that's just a starting point. And then there's like a whole thing around. I often give it as the metaphor I often give is an avocado. They say in avocado, the center of the avocado is the pit. That's like the vector index, right? That is the hard part. You need that. But the flesh that sits around it, that's what you eat. And that comes with documentation, that comes with client libraries, that comes with performance, with scalability, that comes with ease of use, education, videos, tutorials, and so on and so forth. And that is very different in an AI native company than a more traditional company.
Okay, so if I phrase it differently, it's about the focus that you have, right? So basically, you are focusing on AI applications, and
yes,
that's your sole focus. If I want to build an AI application, Weaviate is my choice. In that case, okay, that's great. So being a founder myself, I would like to actually understand, your perspective on What is the hardest part of being a founder, and especially in a space that is, which I believe is getting hyper competitive now, right? So everyone is pouring money. Google claims to be AI first, and so there's a lot of competition. So in general, I mean, not from a business standpoint, it could be in the people side of it, could be the technology side of it, really end-to-end startup. What is the hardest part of being a founder?
Yeah, so ironically, so let me first tell you what is for me personally, what is not, right? So it's like because you mentioned this, like how the space is evolving and those kind of things, the competitive nature. I have to say, I enjoy that a lot. It's just, I'm very proud of the technology that we built. I'm very proud of the community that we built. So it's like I enjoy it. It's like that's fun to me, right? I forgot who said this, but I once heard it was a founder of I forgot who said this, but there was like, if you're in a space like where we're in, right, and you compare it with the Olympics, it's not like the bobsleigh team, right? It's like the 100-meter sprint. And then you need to win from Usain Bolt. And that's fun, right? I love that. That's fantastic. So the thing, to answer your question, so that's what is not for me, but to answer your question, we are a remote company, fully remote company. And every year, at least once a year, we get together with the whole company, right? Somewhere in the world, because we have people literally all over the world, we get together somewhere. And right now, what is it, 80 people or something? And then I see all these people, right? And these people, they get married, they get kids, they have houses, they have families, and they put so much effort, like literally like, blood, sweat, and tears in the company. And I try my best in my role to make sure that I can provide for these people, right? And I'm providing is like three things, right? So that is, from my opinion, that's vision. So, where are we going? Culture. So who are the people we're working with? And enough capital to do that, right? So that's related to any type of capital, revenue, investments, whatever. So those three things, that's what I'm responsible for. And, sometimes you try to figure something out, or sometimes something's very difficult. And that's what I find difficult. So that I think about the people that spend so much time and effort helping me and my co-founder build the company, that I want to make sure they can be part of this journey for a long time. So that is what I sometimes find. If I see all these people, what I find difficult. But, it's a catch-22, because on the other side, I enjoy that too. That's how I would answer your question. It's like, it's very people-focused, right? So it's that where my concerns come from, not so much tech-focused.
Yeah, that's great, right? So I'm glad that you mentioned culture. So at Data Science Dojo, one of the things, I think I mentioned this several times a day when I'm interacting with my engineers, HR, marketing, everyone, and pretty much everyone, not just myself, right? So we have, it is our culture to actually keep, one of the foremost value is that we focus on our culture. That's part of our culture too, right? So it is so important. So how did you build a good culture as a startup? I mean, was it difficult to actually build a culture? And sometimes there is this fallacy about culture and, those vacations and trips to Hawaii, and then, those latte machines and massage chairs. I mean, in my opinion, that's not culture, right? So I would like to hear from you. What do you think is culture, and how hard it is to build, and what are some challenges?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent question, by the way. So let me think about giving you a proper answer. So let's first start with a cliche. So I think that the cliche of that the founder set the culture, that is true. And let me give you two examples from how we do that. So, and I think for those listening to this who might want to become founders, the nice thing about this, it can be anything you want, anything that is for you important, you can pick. So one thing that was important to me was that I had another advisor in our company, and I had a conversation about this very early on in the journey. And I was thinking about these kind of things, right? How do I define this? And at some point, I got this insight that I was like, I want people that should have fun in the company. So people should enjoy. There should also be a form of urgency. I don't like nasty backstabbing behavior to reach our goals. So the word that I got to that was like, I want to be kind. So we want to be kind to each other. our community, our customers, but also our competitors, etc. Right? And I had these words on the screen, and I was looking at these words, and all of a sudden I had this moment of epiphany because I had like joy, happiness, kindness, all these words, and something that came to mind was like, there's one word that stands out, and the word that stands out is kindness. And I showed that to the team. Back then, the team was way smaller, and I said the reason that it stands out because words like joy, happiness, those kind of, that's what you feel. But kindness is something you don't feel, that's something you give. So you can always make that decision to give it. And this same advisor told me a beautiful story because he said, like, listen, he said, building startup is hard, right? So if we like it or not, it's going to be hard. And told me this beautiful story where he said, like, every mammal, one thing that every mammal has in common is that by the time from birth to death, we have like 1 billion heartbeats. So our heart beats around 1 billion times. So that's why an elephant gets older than a mouse, right? And he said, so as a human, we know that on average, it's 1 billion heartbeats. We can't change that. That's just nature. But what we can do is that we can decide what we want to spend those heartbeats on. And that's something what I tied together to the story about kindness. And, so being kind, and I'm no saint, right? So I also make mistakes, and also I can get angry, right? But that trying to be kind was something important. And one way how what we now do in the company that is like became a little tradition that was actually born from me studying music was that when the company was very small, like 8 people, my co-founder, HN, and I, we started to cook for everybody. So every time that we got together as a company, there's a co-founder dinner. That's just us cooking for everybody. And back then, when we were like 8 people, it's like, we will do this forever. So every time we get together with the whole company, the co-founders will cook you a meal. And so the last get-together was like 70 people or something. So this whole company, like we had like candles and music and tables and still us cooking for the people as a token of appreciation for people helping us out. So that is how I decided to do that together with HN. But that's not a silver bullet, right? So there's like, people can do whatever they want, but that's what we decided to do. And now to your question, what's hard about that? That sometimes you hire somebody that can't deal with that, right? And then you need to let that person go. And that has happened at Weaviate. I mean, I can count that literally on one hand, right? So there's like just 1 or 2 times. But that's hard. Because then you go like, oh, crap, this is not working. And then it's very hard to come to the decision like this person does not fit the company. So that's the hard part of it. It's like, it's nice to have those soft skill words and fluffy words, but that means that on the other end of the spectrum, you need to be just, brutally honest and say, okay, this doesn't work. This person, because the downside of doing that in companies, and I like to borrow this word from Ed Catmull from Pixar, like they have the concept of like the circle of trust. So people are in the circle, but if you have like a bad apple in the circle, that's toxic. So you need to take that. Again, hasn't happened of like 1 or 2 times, but that's the difficulty if you want to maintain such a culture.
And you don't have to convince me because I have my own fair share of these things. I mean, as you were mentioning, I love the honest conversation, right? So, yes, we try to define the culture, but at the end of the day, founders are humans, right? So, we try to set standards and we try to live up to those standards, but at the same time, we are humans, right? So at the end of the day, we'll make mistakes too. As long as we are open and we acknowledge that we made mistakes.
Yep.
And move on. And also, you mentioned this example where once in a while, you will bring someone in who's not a cultural fit, and you have to fix that. And so we have a lot of emphasis actually within data science Dojo, right? So we emphasize a lot. We have hired people who did not actually meet the technical bar, but to the fullest. But we would actually hire them because of, being a very good cultural fit, and we have had a lot of success, right? So I think we can coach, we can teach, we can upskill people, But I think fundamentally changing people and making them a fit, it may or may not work in all cases. So I love, that honest answer here. So love it.
No, I appreciate you saying that, and I think the important thing here too is, or something you might find interesting, is I actually have a little theory about that, and I'm still planning to. I will once write this down in a blog post, but the reason I haven't done it is because I haven't figured it out in the details yet. But it's and it's related to what you just mentioned about when you're hiring a data science dojo, that you think about, is that 100% technical fit, but do we then need to accept that this person does not fit culturally and those kind of things? And this is something that I call the long tail of kindness. And that's this. If you build a culture that's very direct and very harsh, then success might peak, right? So you hire somebody just for the technical expertise. They might very unkind to their coworkers, I guess, and then something might peak. Problem is, it's very hard to maintain that because people don't like to work with this person. You might not like to work with this person, and so on and so forth. So then it drops down. And then you have very short tenure at the company. However, if you take time and you know that somebody fits the company, it might take a little bit longer to get people up to speed. But then this person is a great addition to the company, does great work. And because everybody likes each other and they do better work together, then there's a huge long tail. So if you go on our LinkedIn, for example, just Weaviate's LinkedIn, and you see how long people stay at the company, that's pretty long. And that's I have people at the company that are still here from day one, right? And that's that long tail. So it depends a bit on what kind of culture you want to build. But if you also want to go down that path of having values like, for example, as you also mentioned, like kindness, then you can keep in mind that you build a culture with a long tail rather than a culture that peaks. And I mean, I know founders are very successful in doing the first thing, right? So, and they just burn through people very fast. But, these people also do work and their products are also rapidly grow. So it's like it's one or the other. It's whatever you want to do. But I don't want to do that. I want to do the one that I just described. So that's kind of how that's different.
And that's a more sustainable way of doing things, right? So it's not about bringing someone in for a short stint at the expense of the cost of the culture, right? So I totally get that, right? So I mean, we are definitely on the same page on that. So
yeah, but one more thing because this is so interesting. I don't have a problem with people doing it the other way. If that works for them and that's how they want to do it,
absolutely,
they should. But I also just have my own moral and ethical standards as a founder, and this is how I want to do it, right? So it's more that. It's more just, there are many ways how you can do it, but this is how I and apparently you as well, how we want to do this, right? So, and that is just, that's just how we do it and how we've decided to build the companies. And also for you guys, I mean, you guys are pretty successful, right? So it seems to work.
It seems to work. And I think there have been many false starts. I mean, I have to admit that, there have been false starts. I mean, because no one teaches you how to be. Your parents don't teach you how to be a founder, right? So universities don't teach it. It is something that you learn. And one of my mentors in early days, he told me, I'm going to share things with you. I will tell you. And 50% of the things that I mentioned to you, they may not be actually applicable to you, right? So you may end up in a very different situation. So because everyone has their own journey, every startup, the timing, which juncture they are at, personalities, so there are so many variables. So there's no fixed advice. I mean, you do this or you do that, right? So you have to be actually very mindful, considering your circumstances and how you want to actually set the tone and what decisions you want to take. Thank you, Bob. This was very insightful. So you raised 70 million in Series B last year, or combined last year, this year, right? So, and this is significant. So what did you tell the investors? What are you going to do?
So I've been in a very fortunate situation that, except for my seed round, I have not been actively fundraising in the sense like, hey, I'm running out of money, I need help. What started to happen was that new patterns started to emerge that what people had seen from the NoSQL wave. That people were like, hey, there's this new type of database that's emerging, which has not happened for years, right? Or maybe even a decade. And that especially funds with knowledge about this base So like, hey, we want to help you, to build this, because we have a lot of knowledge, what we've known from the past that you might be able to apply on what you're doing right now. And that was very attractive to me. So I am very, blessed with some big investors that are really good at that, right? So, and that's how they're helping us. And for those listening, raising a lot of funds does not equal spending it. Yeah, I mean, for some people it does, but not for me. Does not spend.
Not for the sensible founders, right? So you don't go on a spending spree after you raise money, right? So
exactly. I've raised 1 month of Sam Altman burn rates, but that's a joke. So what you try to do is that we are currently we made this transition from an open source company to an open source project company to an open source business company, right? That's the transition we're making. So, and we started that transition like about a year ago. And it means like that goes to the customers that we're onboarding and the customers that we're working with, ranging from startups to big enterprises, right? And building the team to do that, the go-to-market team to do that, and those kind of things, keeping R&D going to keep working on all the exciting stuff that we've just been discussing with generative feedback loops and those kind of things. And that is how you use these kind of funds moving forward. And the thinking is, and then at the risk of oversimplifying a little bit, from the many problems you will encounter building the business, you do not want lack of money to be one of them, right? That's such an unfortunate situation if that's the situation, right? So, and that is kind of what you get there, right? So you get the opportunity to truly build a great company. And that's why there's so much excitement, because people have seen like, hey, we have done pattern matching from what we've seen in the past. And maybe with AI right now, that's repeating itself. And when we raised our Series A, that was definitely maybe. When we raised a Series B, it was not that maybe anymore. And especially today, it's happening, right? So it's like, people are bringing this stuff to production, these AI native applications. And that's where the market sits, right? And where the market is growing. So that's how the funds are related to what we're doing and the role that it plays in, capturing, market value, if you will.
Okay. And one last question. So we are done after that. So what are some of the most exciting things that you think on the technical side, on the business side, any launches, anything that you would like to share with the listeners, right? So what is Weaviate up to in the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, so we have a lot of stuff coming down the pike when it comes to from an operational perspective. So managing different indices and indices per tenant, like in memory on disk, compression algorithms, scalability, new consensus algorithms, all that kind of good stuff to run this stuff in production. But if I'm going to be honest, the thing that I'm also like really excited about is what we discussed like with the gen feedback loops. And the fact that Weaviate becoming the context window, the work that's happening there to really weave the models and the database together, that is something that I'm like really excited about. I mean, the first thing too, because that's just what our customers need and what our customers ask for to scale their production cases. And that's super important. And I love that too. I get so excited about the new stuff that's coming, the true AI native stuff, because that's what will mark this new era of AI native infrastructure and the businesses that are built on top of that. So I guess that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Bob. It has been a great discussion. Thank you for being here and taking the time to talk to us.
Of course, and thank you for the wonderful questions. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.